All right, good afternoon, everybody. It is Thursday, December 3rd of the year 2020, just after 3 p.m. Eastern Time. And this is the ArcGIS Pro Workshop. Welcome, everybody. I'm glad everybody's here. Um, so you'll see on the webcam, you'll see myself, you'll see Chris. Say hello, Chris.
How's everybody doing today?
Yeah. Chris is going to moderate so that if we have any questions, you can put them in the chat window, or if you've got access to the audio, you can also go and just tell us. Um, and again, Chris goes and watches that chat window all the time because I get involved and I just get talking and I don't look there at all. So um, it's only when I get bored that I start looking over there. So Chris will make sure that your questions get taken care of and such. And you also see that we have Nancy von Meyer here, and so hi Nancy, I'm glad you're here. I really am. So it's good to see you. And Victoria Myers is here from Jefferson County, West Virginia. So I'm glad you're here. So it looks like we have a good group here. Um, Today, ArcGIS Pro. This is not the Fabric. This is Pro. We're going to talk about attribute rules, and we're going to explore attribute rules through here. Everything from what is an attribute rule, what are the implications of applying it, and then we're going to start doing some simple attribute rules and building on them and building on them and building on them and building on them. We're going to talk about the different types of attribute rules there are, which ones work within which structure and which ones only work in certain structures, and sort of we'll go through and this right now, the data that I have is in a file geodatabase, which means we can do calculation attribute rules and we can do constraint attribute rules. We cannot do validate rules though. So what is an attribute rule? The easiest way to think about it is an attribute rule is a small scripted program that goes and fires off and is utilized inside of ArcGIS Pro to go and make sure that certain things happen. All right, it is a rule-based system that ensures that something happens. It can be something as simple as saying, every time X happens, go and take and calculate a value to a field. All right, it can be something as simple as that. Or it can say, drill down through a couple of layers and make sure that you get attributes from all of those layers underneath here and figure out what's in here and calculate something there. Or it can be a constraint rule, which means that make sure that whatever you're doing complies with this constraint. And if you don't do this, or if it fails to comply, don't let you finish. It won't let you finish it if it's a constraint rule. So let's start with this. And let's start with the number one warning. Now make sure that everybody understands this. An attribute rule can be applied to any feature class inside of a geodatabase. All right? But once you apply an attribute rule to a feature class, you can no longer read it inside of ArcMap. Okay? So I'm going to prove that to you. Right now, what you're seeing here is actually in a database called Osceola, and it's called interim data. These are simple feature classes. There's no topology on here. There's nothing, just simple feature classes. All right. And I'm going to go and get out of here. And I'm only doing this so I can release locks inside this file geodatabase. I'm going to go into ArcMap. Quickly, I wish. No. I'm going to go into ArcMap. I'm just going to pull up a map document, even though it's empty, just so it resets this. And I'm going to go in here and I'm going to take that same feature data set and load it up, and there they are. I can read them. No problem whatsoever. I can read them. They look fine. I can edit them. I can manipulate them. No problem whatsoever. All right. So I'm going to go in here now and I'm going to cancel out of here. I'm not going to save this. I'm going to go back to ArcGIS Pro. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to enter an attribute rule against one of those feature classes, and then I'll go back into ArcMap and show you what happens if you have an attribute rule on it. So I'm going to enter a real simple rule against these tax parcels. All right, and to do that, I right click on that layer, I go to design, and I go down to attribute rules. This brings up a dialog box in which I say I want to go and add a rule here, and I can say, let's get out of here right now. I can say that this is just calc acres. All right, and I can describe what this is, whether it's within a subtype or whether it's just everything. And I can go to calculated acreage, and I can then go and fill in what I actually wish to have done. All right, and this is an arcade expression. This expression says, take the $ feature, take whatever I'm working on right now, whatever I'm creating, and pull out the area property and return it to me in acreage. And I'm just going to do a verify, make sure that this is a valid expression. It is. And say every time I create something or every time I update something, go and run this rule. So you have, here's the name of the rule, here's the field it's going to work against, here's the actual script that's going to be run. I can put in an error in here. In this case, there's no way that there's an error. I can tell it to update it every time I create something new or every time I update it. And then I can go and say, go ahead and save this to my feature class. And it gets saved in the geodatabase so that anytime anyone uses this feature class, that attribute rule is part of it. All right, I'm going to save my ArcGIS Pro. Save this, and then I'm going to go and get out of here and get into ArcMap again. Come on, I know I have a change here. While I'm doing that, I can start ArcMap again. Come on. I recently have been having ArcGIS Pro struggle stopping. I already saved it. I'm going to crash. And then I'm going to go back here to that empty document. And I'm going to go in here and I'm going to load up the interim. And what do I get? I get an error opening up this feature class. It says this item does not have a definition, unable to instantiate class for XML schema type because it's got an array of attribute rules. So is it that entire feature data set? No, it's only that one layer that actually gets marked so that it cannot be read with ArcMap. All right, so this is on a layer by layer basis. It is not on the overall data set. It's not on the overall geodatabase. It's only on a layer by layer basis on here, in which the inclusion of attribute rules goes and prevents you from accessing this in ArcMap ever again. All right, interestingly, if I go back to ArcGIS Pro and delete or remove that attribute rule, it's able to be read again inside of ArcMap. So it's the existence of this additional attribute rule definition that ArcMap does not know what's going on with this, and it can't go and read it. What that means is that as nice as attribute rules are, you cannot go and use them on any feature class that is still being consumed by someone that is in ArcMap. All right, just as long as you are aware of that, that's the one caveat we're going to say. From that point forward, we're going to assume, okay, everything's fine. We know that if you have an attribute rule, you're going to use it inside of ArcGIS Pro. You're not going to, it doesn't work in ArcMap at all. All right. So let's just show, and let's make sure it's still there because I did crash out of this. There it is, still there. And again, it's just going to calculate the acreage into that calculated area field. So let me go in here and actually go down to here, which is my tax parcel. And when I go and create a new polygon, all right, when I create that new polygon, if I go to my attribute field, I will see that it automatically went and calculated for me the area of in acres for that polygon that I just created. And when I go in here and let me go in here, go to edit now and go to select and say edit these vertices, and I move these vertices around. When I commit them, you'll watch and see that that acreage will change automatically. Each time I make a change to this feature, that rule is triggered and fires off, and it recalculates those things as I go. Really simple rule. It's a nice rule. While we're in here, let's also talk about this because I get this question an awful lot. Frank, when you pull this thing up, you've got this calculated acreage field. It's formatting itself to 2 decimal places with a suffix of AC on it. How do you do that? Well, it turns out that inside of Pro, and I went to Design Fields, I can go in here, and this is my calculated area field. If I go to the number, I can tell it I want 2 decimal places, and I want it to show 1,000 separators. I want it to pad it with a 0, and I want to have a suffix of X or whatever it is on here. We used to do this by setting up rates on the shape field and all sorts of settings on the shape area field. This is now the way we do it inside of Pro, is using this definition of fields, our data designer in here. All right. Any questions on this? This is, as simple as we're going to get. Is every time we do this, we want it to recalculate this value on here. By the way, that same arcade script can just as easily be used to do a calculation. So I can go in here, and I'm only going to calculate a couple fields here, or a couple records. I can go in here and go to calculate and tell it, not Python, but arcade, that I want it to calculate the area of these features, and I want it to go and tell us the acreage of those features in here. So again, pull out the area property of this feature and then go and store it as acreage in here. So I can do there. Any way to add
Tori has.
suffix like AC instead of
There
AC?
you go.
Actually, right now, this is a number field, and you can put a suffix on there. Okay. By the way, this is there when calculated that there. Let's go ahead and hit OK. See it calculated it all. So if I go in here, it's a great question, by the way, Tori. If I go in here right now, I have a definition and says, here's the suffix that I can put in here. And if I look, it doesn't have it there. However, I wonder, and this is purely speculation here, I wonder if we go here to our databases, whether or not we have a domain for this. LR area types, no, that's not it. There's PF area types, there we go, right here. This is not the same thing. This is not the same thing. This is the values that get stored in the parcel fabric. It has an area unit type, and that's what this is. So this is not the same thing. So to answer your question, there is no way that I know of at the moment that you can write in and change lowercase AC to an uppercase, because this really doesn't get stored. All right, this is similar to Excel. When you go into Excel and you go and you format it as currency, so it puts a $sign in front of it. All right. I haven't found here yet where you can define what that option is as far as suffix. That's a really good question though, but I have not found where you can actually do that. Okay. So does it calculate using the specified unit? Yes, it does. So let me go in and show you this again. I still have this value here. And I'm just going to go in here to Arcade again. And this time I'm going to tell it to go and take the feature and give it to me in square feet, I think is the correct one here. Nope. Maybe it's feet. Oh, duh. Inval unit. There we go. Tell it to calculate, instead of being in acreage, to calculate it in feet. And it will then go and calculate these values to square feet. All right. But in this case, it's reflecting it back as acreage because I told it to go as acreage. One more time. It should have done something there. I thought this was square feet.
What if you remove the space between them?
Yeah, it's nope. It must just be feet. Why don't I make sure I spell this correctly? Nope. Nope, it is feet.
Frank, Jeff also has a question in the chat.
Yes, Jeff.
He says, can attribute rules work across multiple layers in a database? Like if I was editing an intersected layer, could a rule be build if field A in layer X is changed, then update field A in layer Y to that value?
Yeah, it's a little bit tougher that you can go and have one trigger fire against another layer. It gets into a little bit more complex areas of Arcade. I actually was recently trying to do that, and I wound up sort of hitting a brick wall. My programming skills were sort of limited, but what I can give you some hints, Jeff. All right. I think the way that that has to be done is you have to go and in Arcade, you define a dictionary, and which is the edit dictionary, and you tell it to go and fire it off and do it that way. Like I said, I was not able to get it completely to work, but in fact, it was. I think that was the right way we were going about it. On there. And I'll show you some of the scripts that we actually use to get to something similar to that on there as we go through here. So I'm not sure why this wasn't calculating out on here. That should have calculated it out. I think because we actually have an attribute rule here. So let's go in here and do another attribute rule and just talk about what else we can do here. All right. The first one is yes, we can do that attribute rule. The next one I have here, this is the name value that's stored in here. So maybe I need I want to go and take a number out of here. And if I'm looking, this, by the way, is the 2 for the section, 2 for the township, 2 for the range, and then I believe it's 4 for the subdivision, 4 for the lot, or 4 for the block, and then 4 for the lot on there. So let's say I wanted to go and get this value, which is 6 over from here. So this would probably have been lot number 10 on here. So what I could do is I can say and add a rule here in which I want to calculate the lot number. All right, calculate the lot number, and I can put a description in here. Always document what you're doing. And then say what I want to do is I want to go and calculate this text name field. And I'm going to use another Arcade expression. In this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the name field and I'm going to take from the middle of the name field, and I'm going to go over and I'm counting over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And I'm going to put 11 in there. And I'm just going to do 2. Now, the one thing that's interesting about Arcade is that when you start counting in Arcade and counting over, you start not at 1, but you actually start at 0. Arcade is 0 indexed. All right, so let me go and do that. Before I get here, let's run that. All right, let's run that against this one here and see what it actually does. So again, I'm going to take from the middle of the name field. I'm going to start at position number 11, again with 0 indexing, and I'm going to get 2 places or 2 characters on here. And what did it go wrong here? Unexpected caused the tool to fail. The dreaded, and Mike, yes, I agree, Mike. So let's start with this. Let's go with the right, start simple enough. Start with the right 8. Let's make sure this is working here. In fact, this is not working. Why is this not working at all? Let's start with the simple thing. Here. Let's do this. Let's restart this. I'm not sure what's going on here. Now, Mike, actually, they're both text fields. That's why I was, or excuse me, Mark, they're both text fields. That's why I was pretty confident that would work. I think there's something else going on. So let's just try it here. And let's start simple just to make sure that Arcade is working here. Let's take the name field and apply that over. Interesting. Let me go into another data set here. And let me go and add a field. Empty space. Of course, I have a big data set here. I don't have a small one. Sorry about that. This is a county that has about 100 and let's take this and move this up so we can see it. All right, there it is. Let's save that. All right, there's the test field. Let's go and calculate it now. And let's start off with this. All right. So it is working there. Now, let's do this. All right, so what I did in here is I took and I actually began by going in the middle of the name value, the value that's stored in the name field. I went 11 positions over, starting with 0 So it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I guess I started there and 2 characters over. So I can go and create an attribute rule that goes and automatically calculates some other portion of this. Again, this same arcade expression can be used for things like partial labeling or attribute rules or whatever. We have several clients that they have 2 variations on their name field. One has dashes in it, the other one doesn't have dashes in it. So we go and we'll write expressions that say every time you make a change, automatically calculate the other one out, whether it be taking the dashes and replacing them with nothing, or inserting dashes on there as you're going along. So again, this is a valid arcade expression. Let's go here now to our attribute rules and add an attribute rule that calc the test name field, and it is the test name field, and the expression is going to be that midpoint in there, and we're going to do in the trigger so that when we create it and then when we also update it, it will go ahead and test those values in here. Don't know what happened with that other map document with that other data. It was a different data set that I was using. Not sure what was going on there. All right, so now we go in here and I go to create, and if I create a text parcel, all right, when I do this and I look at my attributes, it's got nothing in the name field, nothing in the test name field. Matter of fact, this new one doesn't even have the calc area attribute role in here. But when I go and put another number here, all right, and here as soon as I hit enter to go and validate this, it triggers it off as a change in my data. And thinking about it, that's what was happening before. As I was creating these new ones and doing a calc on it, it was triggering the attribute rule to automatically calc the acreage again. That's why it wouldn't store that value in there. So now it automatically went and calculated this test name for me on here. All right. So you can use an attribute rule to go and do a calculation on here. And these calculations can get very, very interesting. So for example, you can calculate the acreage in a field. By the way, Tori, this stated area unit field, this is the field in which that domain is used as far as what type of area it is. And that goes with these stated area fields. These calculated and stated area fields are both number fields. So you cannot go and calculate the suffix on there. It has to be something that the software that goes and puts in there. And I don't know how to go and change that domain that's built in there yet. All right, let's do something a little bit more interesting on here. Let's go and, because this is just a regular text string, I can go and build something in here where it includes maybe a text value and an acreage value in here in numeric field. I can go in here to this again, and I can modify this and say, all right, well, let's do this, and then let's add, all right, just a spacer, and then let's add the area. But what this is going to give us, this is going to give us a number further out. So let's go and round this to 2 decimal places. And then let's go ahead and also add, or as Tori wants, something like this. All right. So again, we now have a new acreage field, or a new expression in here for the attribute rule, and it's going to be fired off every time we add something or anytime we update something on here. And we cannot update our attribute rules until we actually go and save any edits. And let's go and just delete that edit. Then we can go back here to our rules and save it.
Frank, Alex has a question in the chat.
Yes, Alex. Can you use an attribute rule? Go ahead.
Nope, go for it. You're already reading it.
Can you use an attribute rule to calculate a field based on another layer? For example, we want to calculate the commission district or parcel zone for a parcel. Alex, you're amazing, because that's the next thing I'm going to show you. All right. I want to go and do this one. The next one I'm going to do is actually take values from another layer and put it in there. All right, so now I'm going to go to create, and I'm going to do a tax parcel again. This tax parcel, again, it's not going to do anything initially because there's nothing. Oh, look at that. It automatically went and appended to it the acreage for it. Now if I put a test and I make sure I have enough values in there, it then took the characters out of that string and then also appended to that last part of it, which was the acreage and such. Okay, so there's something. Now let's go and do something a little bit more on this. Let's go again to the attribute rules. Let's discard this first of all. All right, now let's go to the attribute rules. Now let's get into something a little bit more interesting. So I'm going to go and delete this rule, and I'm going to go and create another one. All right. And I'm just going to say calc section. And this is going to be for that same test name field. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and cheat a little bit, as we always do. And I'm going to load an expression here that I have. Now what this expression is going to do is, and again, arcade expression, it's going to go and intersect another layer. All right. When it intersects that other layer, it's going to pull a field out of there, a value out of that other layer. So in this case, let's say I wish to go and do it something within a section. All right. Cancel out of here so I can show us what we have here. So we have a field here, and we have on here sections. I was hoping that we had something a little bit more. Now let's go and intersect maybe subdivisions. So with subdivisions, I have a subdivision name field here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and tell this again. I'm going to go and load that same script again. All right, and on here, I'm going to go and tell it to go and intersect against the subdivision. Yeah, Frank. I'm going to go to properties and make sure what the name of this is. This, in fact, is called subdivisions. Even though it might say subdivision polygons here, that is called subdivisions. So it is going to go and intersect subdivisions. So what we're doing here is we're setting up a buffer. And that buffer is just going to say that it's just going to look for inside that polygon. It's going to do a buffer. In this case, it's doing a buffer of 1/1000th of a foot. We can make it 10 feet or whatever. It depends upon how accurate things are that it's going against. Let's say 10 foot here. The problem with this is that if you have a subdivision which is less than 10 feet wide, it's going to fail on this. But in this case, we're doing it against subdivisions, so we can say good. So we're setting up a variable called buffer on this. Next we're doing is we're setting up a variable that says what is the layer that we're going to intersect, and it's going to intersect a feature set by name, and it's stored in our current data store. This is a global inside of Arcade, and it is called subdivisions. You must use the actual name of this feature class in here for it to work. We're closing it out and we're going to intersect it with that buffer on here. Then what we're going to do is we're going to create a variable for the number of times that it intersects, because conceivably it might intersect multiple times. So we're then going to do a count on that and say, okay, so if the variable first is setting up a variable expression called expressions and saying, okay, if the count is equal to 0, meaning no intersections, then go ahead and put this value in here. Else, it's going to look at the number of times it's intersecting that, and for each time it intersects that, it's going to pull out from that actual intersection that it's doing. It's going to pull out the name value, store that in this EXPR, and then when it's done, it's going to go and return that on here. All right, and that's going to return the final results of that EXPR into, I probably should have gone and at least validated that just to make sure. Okay, it's going to store that in the test name field. And again, we're going to do this when it's new or updated on here. So let's actually see this thing working. So Alex has another question. Does the layer in this example, the subdivision layer, need to be in the map, or can you reference a layer in a GDB or Access or ArcGIS Online? It's my understanding, Alex, it must be in this map. It must be in this data stored. Again, with Arcade, I do not believe you can go outside of your current data store, your currently loaded data on here. So let's turn some of these off here. And just to make sure, yeah, let's go and change the symbology on this. Just a single symbol so we can see what's going on here. All right. Let's make it a little bit bigger so we can see it against this other elements in here. All right, so Here are subdivision boundaries. Let's turn our points off here. Subdivision boundaries. Let's go and create now on here. Show all templates that are on here. Let's create a tax parcel. And under the attributes, it then went and intersected the layer underneath there and is now populating this with the name of the subdivision in which this is located. If we go over here, I believe this is a different one, yeah, Harmony. So as we go through here, it's automatically going calculating it. Alex is responding, for some reason I thought if the layer was uploaded online. Okay, so that's a little bit different. If it is a feature service, I believe you can reference that feature service as the data store. It becomes a little bit more complicated though in doing that because it doesn't know whether you have permissions on it or anything. It's much easier if you have that feature service in your project file. Right? It has to be in the project file, not necessarily in the same geodatabase, but it does have to be in the project file for you. Okay. All right. So you saw here what this was doing. As I'm doing this, it automatically goes through and is intersecting whatever subdivision this is located inside of. All right, this is located inside of a subdivision that has a parcel name on it. And you can see how fast this works. In this case, there is no intersection, no subdivision on top of here that it's actually going and intersecting, so it comes out as null. If you'll remember inside of this rule, we told it here that if the intersection was nothing, it goes and right now it just puts spaces in there. So that if it doesn't intersect something, you can go and put something else in there. You can tell it to go, well, just if you don't intersect, there's no subdivision or whatever you want to go and do in it. It allows you to go and drill down through that to these other intersections on there. All right. What happens if it crosses the boundary between two? Mike, thank you. All right. So if it's going and if it is going and intersecting between these two, what happens to it? In this case, and again, we can see that one has a valid 1. This one has this number here. This one has a separate one, I'm pretty sure, as I zoom in here. So because we put a very simple expression in here, this expression then goes and says, okay, in this case, it's only assuming you're going to be doing it against 1. You could, in fact, have this set up so that for each of these in here, it goes and stores a variable. And then at the end, goes and aggregates those variables together. So you could have this set up so that with this expression, it looks at every time it intersects something, stores that as a variable, and then at the end of it, once it's done, all the intersections it's doing, it can string that together and put that value in there. Again, it's really comes down to how do you want to go and design that in here. The biggest thing or the most intriguing thing about this is this layer, this right here, setting up the feature set by name. That's the real beauty inside of here. setting up the feature set by name so that in fact you can tell it to go and intersect something else on here. I can share with you that one of the things I recently did is I had an annotation feature class. Nobody likes annotation anymore. So I had an annotation feature class, and my client said, I would like to take that annotation and capture the text string that's in that and store it on the line that's right next to it. I wrote an arcade expression that went and did a feature set by name and did an intersects against that feature set by name. Did a search. I did a search here, how far out to look from my line. And if it went and intersected a piece of annotation, it then took that text string out of that annotation and populated it into that line feature class. Sort of a sophisticated way of going and performing an attribute transfer on here. And it worked for all of them. The hardest part was figuring out how far my buffer should be and whether or not that anna was in a certain distance of the line or not. But normally I would have had to do nears and do all sorts of external geoprocessing tool to do the same thing, but I could do it inside of Arcade. All right. Do we have any more questions on this intersect set by name and the intersects function against that? This is very, very powerful. So we could conceivably do something like, remember I said that the actual parcel name here is, first you intersect the section, then you intersect the township and get the range value and the township value out. Then you intersect whether or not it's in a subdivision or not. Then you intersect whether it's inside of a block. And then you intersect the lot value in here. You could actually have it go and build out your entire parcel number just by doing these intersects all in one feature class. So let me see if I have here something that we can go and demonstrate that. No, not D. Not D. Attribute rules. Up one, here we go here. Yeah, all right. This is the same thing in which I had a grid value. This grid value was just a set of polygons. You can think of it as either a map index polygon layer. That's the best way of thinking of this. And what the client wanted to do is the client wanted to figure out what is the next incrementing value in that grid. How many parcels do I have in that grid already? And I just want to add one each time. So in fact, that's what this is. It's going and intersecting against the grid. So it gets the grid number in here and it figures out how many times it goes and intersects things on here. And then what this does is it goes and actually increments that up and does a count value on it and adds one to it. So that it then goes and says, okay, this is the 145th parcel inside of this grid, or the 146th parcel inside of this grid. So that's what this attribute rule does. It's an automatic calculation rule that automatically goes and figures out how many other values are in there and goes and appends that and gives that value here in that expression on here. Let me show you another one that we can do with this. This one's a little bit different because this one actually is intersecting 3 different layers. Here's the first intersection where it intersects against the simultaneous conveyance layer. All right, goes and intersects that, and it winds up pulling the plat name out of that. What's a little bit different about this expression is that this wants to go and feed these values into a fixed length string. So what we have to do is we have to figure out what the actual length of that value that's stored in the plat name field is, and subtract that value off of the actual fixed length at that portion of it's supposed to be 30, and then goes and calculates as an EXPR1, expression number 1, what that portion of this value is for the plat name. Then it goes and intersects what's called the first division layer. First division layer, by the way, this is in Texas. First division layer is actually a block layer. So it goes through and does that same thing and pulls out of it the division designator. It then goes and calculates how long it is, and that first division portion is only 5 characters long. So first we add the 30, and then we add 5, and then we come up with this expression number 2, and then we go against the second division layer, which is the lot layer, as we most of us call it. Does that, and it pulls the division designator out of that one, and that's only supposed to be 9 characters long. So it then goes and pulls that all together, and at the end we have expression number 1 plus expression number 2 plus expression number 3. We go and store that into a final string value, and that gets returned, and then it basically calculates that automatic number, what they call the tax parcel legal key, automatically goes and calculates that forward as part of this arcade expression for a calculate attribute rule. All right. So, Jeff, I see you've got a comment here. You'd love to learn more about arcade. Arcade is amazing. It is, if somebody comes to me and said, okay, ArcGIS, what do I do? There's so much in here right now. I'm going to tell you, learn arcade. Arcade is an amazing expression. It's used for doing a field calculation, right? As you saw me do on here. It's used to go and for attribute rules on there. It's used for labeling. Look at, if we go in here and let's look here. This is arcade. This is a label expression which goes and takes a numeric value out of the line field. Actually, it takes 2 out there. It takes the lines and such, and it sets up 4 labeling expressions, including everything from color to rounding of a number to what it prepends and such. It goes in here, for example, here's a function which actually calculates the let's go all the way down to here. At the end of the functions, it calculates the degrees, the minutes, and the seconds, and what quadrants it's in. All right. All within arcade, real time as it's going through. And then it goes and calculates, what these values are, whether or not they're valid, it symbolizes them as far as whether or not they're valid. Here is the direction string that it's going and putting down there. Here's the distance string that it's putting down there. If it's a curve, it's going and putting the radius, the curve parameters, and it's assembling it all together and storing it out. Learn arcade. Now here's the downside. There's no real classes for arcade. The best that I've been able to find is there's a very, very short introduction to arcade book that was written about 2 years ago. That's it. The rest of it is all online. There is some interesting arcade elements in here. Yeah, learn arcade. There's a tutorial here. There is GIS developers here. There's actually a playground here. Okay, you can write your first expression. There's a playground, there's a guide, there's a functional reference. It's, help you to understand this. This is probably as close as you're going to get. Videos in here and such. Jeff, why do you think Arcade or Esri hasn't adopted it more? Oh, Esri has adopted it everywhere. It's the rest of us that haven't adopted it yet. I can tell you Esri's using this everywhere, using this ArcGIS Online. If you're writing story maps, if you're using web maps, you can use Arcade to write pop-up expressions and configure pop-ups to do those. We actually had a story, we had a deep dive here in which a friend of mine, Nat Cake, up at Tallahassee, Leon County, he's got like 30 expressions in a pop-up, and you click on a parcel and it tells you what zoning it is, everything you want to know about that parcel. He's doing that through intersects set by names and intersects against them on feature set by names and intersects against them and feeding them into the pop-up. Arcade is amazing. Why isn't there more training resources? That's the question. That's the question. Why isn't there more training on here? I wish I knew. I can tell you it is extremely dynamic. They continue to expand on this. I can share this, and let me get in here. There's a couple things you might think about, and I know we're getting sidetracked here a lot, but this is an attribute rules group on the new GeoNet. This is a really good group. What's new in here? Hussein. I've met Hussein at Holistic Testing a lot. This is the guru. This is the guy who knows about arcade rules, how to go and utilize them. Most of the code, most of us have stolen from him or borrowed from him, if you want to go and say it that way. He's a guy who's actually writing most of the arcade elements in here, and especially on the attribute rules. Really great guy, smart guy, and he'll go and answer things as you're going through. Okay. So we've gone through and we've shown you some of the simple things that you can do with calculate attribute rule. We haven't touched yet on the constraint. All right, so let's go and do this. Let's go and go here to design and go to attribute rules again here. And what we're going to do is, again, a calculate rule is one that fires off when you create something, when you update something. You can disable it. You can have it go and exclude it from application evaluation. And this, by the way, and I think was it Jeff or Mike or somebody was asking earlier, can you fire it off from another feature class? I think it's by saying exclude it from this application evaluation, instead have it do it another way. I think this is one of the keys, is to go and set it up this way. Again, by default, an attribute rule will fire off every time one of these triggers are put in place, every time you do a deletion or an update or whatever. All right. I hate to do this. I'm going to have to mute everybody. I'm getting some feedback somewhere. Sorry about that. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do a different type of attribute rule. This type of attribute rule is called a constraint rule. And so what we can do with this is say that, and let me see, do I have a constraint rule defined? I don't think I do. Sorry about this. Let me go in. Pull here. All right. Let me go in and do this. So with a constraint rule, the way this works is that you set up a Boolean evaluation. All right. You tell it to go and evaluate something. And if something is true, it allows you to go and proceed with the feature, the creation of the feature. If it is false, let me make sure I evaluate this right. The other way around. If it's true, we'll see. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a rule, and I'm going to automatically make it fail. Must have the name value. All right. So notice there's no name field that it's calculating against, or no field is calculating against. It's evaluating this expression as we go through here. So let's see if I can type this expression out. I don't have it saved at all anywhere. So let's, no, is empty. Let's start with this. Let's evaluate and set a variable called is null and say that if the name field is empty, all right, it sets something up there. Now I'm going to use an if arcade expression in here, and I'm going to say if is null is equal to true. All right, and what the if does is it evaluates a variable, and if it's true, it does this. All right, I'm going to go in ULL. If it's not, it goes and does something else on here. And I'm just going to say use the feature name. All right, and then I wanted to return the value. All right, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go and say, when I create something, evaluate this and say, does the name field have anything on here? If it has something in here, it's going to go and use that as the name field and return that value. If it's not, it's going to return null. It's going to cause an error for me. All right, and I can tell it what an error name, a number on here, and just put an error in there. And I can say anytime we create or update anything, to go and fire this thing off. And go get rid of all my edits beforehand. And now let's go and save my attribute rule. Attribute rules can only be saved if you have no pending error or no pending edits out there. Any questions? Victoria, thank you. Thank you. Victoria just said he has a YouTube channel mostly about server, but he is awesome. Hussein is awesome. Yeah. I actually was out at Holistic a couple of years ago and met Hussein, and he came in, he gave a presentation to the people who were attending there. blew our minds as far as what was going on and what he was doing with Arcade. Um, Absolutely blew our minds. All right, so now I have two rules here. I have calculation rule, which calculates this other element in here. And then I have a constraint rule on here, which says, oh, you got to have a name on here before we'll be able to go and do anything else in here. So let's go into create and let's try to go and build something on here. And what's it say? It says, nope, you don't have a name field. You can't do this. And it says, this is bad. This is bad. You can't do this at all. So the constraint rule prevents us from creating this thing that we're trying to do because it breaks the rules in here. Now, again, that rule that I just did, you would never put a rule like that in place because it's going to always fail. But you could have a rule in place that says that this parcel that you're creating has to be at least a certain size. It has to be at least 100 square feet or whatever. It has to meet some minimum criteria on here. You could put that in place so that if you attempt to go and create a parcel that's smaller than that, if you attempt to go and create a sliver, including things like a sliver because of a clip, because remember, it's going to fire off every time something gets created or updated or modified. So the reality is that you can have a rule like that on your tax parcels that says, if this thing is creating slivers, give me an error and don't let me do this thing. Stop me from doing it on here. Or more realistically, you could have a rule that says, for example, that you might put this against not tax parcels, but maybe lot polygons and say that you cannot build a lot polygon that is outside a subdivision polygon. So lot polygons can only exist inside of subdivision polygons on here. All right, so a constraint rule prevents you from breaking the rules. It won't let you finish. I can't finish this. No matter what I do, I can't finish this. The only thing I can do is cancel out of it on here. It's the only thing I can do. Again, that rule that I set up, that was purposely set up to automatically fail all the time. But again, you could set a criteria on here and say that if it doesn't meet this criteria, don't let us do it. All right. So the final type of rule that there is, again, there's calculate rules. These calculate rules allow you to go and automatically, every time something happens, recalculate it. There is constraint rules that prevent you from doing something on here. Chris will share with you one of the things we were thinking of doing. We have a client who has a very unique parcel identifier in that you have 5 characters and then you have a space and then you have the rest of the string. Well, what happens is either they type things wrong or we type things wrong or we put that space in the wrong position. We could have a constraint rule that says that if that space is not exactly in the right position, don't let it happen. Now, we would not do that on, if we were to go and establish that rule, we would not say do it every time you create something, only when you modify it, only when you type in what that name field is or what that parcel ID is, and have it used to go and do that. Yep. So, Nancy, thank you. This could be an opportunity to clean up some of the punctuation on the parcel IDs. Yes, you can. Now remember, the attribute rules only fire off when one of those triggers. And when you create something new, when you insert it in, or when you change it or update it. So the odds are you're probably not going to use attribute rules to clean up things after they've created, but keep them clean as you're creating things. All right. So let's delete this rule and let's get out of here and save this out, and then show you another thing that we can do. We could also go and set it up so that, come on, so that if we have, for example, internal rules within the organization that all of the attribution has to be uppercase or has to be lowercase or have any sort of internal rules like that, we can have it automatically set up so that on here, on here, we can set up a rule that as soon as this finishes, there we go, set up a rule that set the name field to upper, in which we go and we have our name field, all right, and the expression is set the name field to upper, all right, and that fires off anytime we do any sort of updates on here and here. And let's wait for this to go and do this. By the way, creating these rules, storing them and such, as you can tell, it does take a long time. Come on. So I see that Nancy's got a question here. If you built a parcel ID that was just numbers or letters and then had a routine to add the dashes or letters, add the dashes, say something. Yes, yeah, definitely. You can do that. We can actually set a rule here where it takes that and automatically adds the dashes to it, and they either to populate another value or as part of the other. But unless we commit to redoing all the data from scratch, we always have legacy data to deal with. Yeah, you can always have data to deal with. I'm not going to agree with that. So in here, I've got a string here, and I've set it, just told it that anytime you go and type anything on here, to automatically go and populate them and make sure they're all upper. So again, it doesn't have to be just new. Anytime something is changed as an update, that attribute rule will fire off. All right? It automatically will go and fire that off.
So all I was getting at, Frank, was that's great. I mean, these attribute rules are good, and you're right. There's a lot of complications with the legacy data, but you know, it just seems to me that you could have a field for legacy PIN and start moving forward, or have a way to reformat real data into nonsensical data. I mean, some of these old legacy parcel numbers are, you can't believe
we've got, you know, I mean, yeah, we've got a county here in Florida that has 3 different legacy numbers on it that have to be maintained constantly.
I know, it's just so frustrating to me. It's like you know, it reminds me of when you get done building a really nice web map and then somebody goes, yeah, but can you make it look like a Leroy pen set? You know, I mean, at some point in time, you have to say, no, I want to be able to see it on my phone. I want to be able to type in the letters without going through 13 character shifts on my keyboard to get it in.
Right.
And I just think at some point in time, I mean, it just seems like at some point in time these things have to be retired, or we have to just have a way to write it back, or at some point in time the GIS and the mapping has to become important enough that it no longer has to kowtow to these older systems. And I understand that it's hard. I get it, that it's hard. And I get it that there's a lot of yabbits out there, just a lot of yabbits.
So Nancy, this comes down to what we've been dancing around with this whole longer discussion about what is it that we're doing here. And what it comes down to, at least in my mind, is that we have to make a transition away from creating a cartographic product into creating real digital data and imposing on that digital data the sets of business rules that we need to have. We need to treat this as valuable data, not as lines and polygons that are used to create a map. This is data. This is data. You should have rules about it. You should know how it's supposed to look, what it's supposed to say, everything in here. That's what this is about. Yeah.
Absolutely, and I agree with you. And getting it correct on data entry, the attribute rules are great for that. And I agree with Mark. I mean, you can run a field calculator to reformat it or whatever it is you need to do on export or to get other people to talk to it. I completely understand that. I'm not immune to the issue. But
you're
honestly,
right. Yeah. There are yeah buts all over the place. Yeah, but we don't have the resources to do it. Yeah, but we've got this legacy. And when we go into a client's office and we start asking them about the business rules and how is this thing structured, I can share with you that recently I was at one and they described to me what their data model was. And in this data model, they had things stacked on top of things, on top of things, on top of things. And they used a code that was embedded inside the parcel to figure out what they were. And as I started digging in and saying, okay, now let's put that code down. And they're like, okay, well, that works except for now, except for this thing, or except for this thing. And no, this one's a little bit different. And it's always, we are dealing with legacy data. We know that. But how do we try to memorialize what it is, or try to really understand what needs to be fixed and what we can sort of work around? That's where we're at.
Well, and I'm all for having an exception and having a flag in every data set that tells me does this follow the rules or is this an exception? Because at the BLM one time we spent 2 days data modeling these special surveys and an entire day looking at something that was called a COAL survey, COAL survey. And we wasted 12 people for a whole day doing this modeling. And then at the end of the day, I said, well, how many of these are there? There's 2 in the country, in the entire nation. There's 2 of them.
Yes.
I mean, and I'm not convinced they weren't coded incorrectly to begin with. And so wouldn't it have been easier to say, to say we've got 99% of it, and this 1% is exceptional?
Yeah.
Because we're dealing with cadastral data and we're always going to have that real or written thing or the thing that was just entered wrong. And we're trying to preserve the fact that it was entered wrong. That's the battle we have. And I understand we want to treasure our exceptions. I mean, my husband was a geneticist and he said, you always want to treasure the exceptions. And I concur with that. But I don't think the exceptions need to drive the rules.
Yeah. As a surveyor, we're always looking for the edge cases. We're always looking for the things that don't match. We sort of can quickly find the things that do match, but it's the ones that don't match the rules. That's what we're always looking for, because the odds are that's going to have a greater impact on anything else. So let's put a pin in that discussion right now. Let me finish this because we're coming up on the 90-minute mark. All right. So there is 2 more things we want to talk about. The validation rules. A validation rule. You can have this set up so that a certain condition occurs and it gets marked that the validation rule is something that gets triggered because something is marked that it requires validation. This only occurs with batch versioning on Enterprise. A validation rule is only applicable with branch versioning when it's being served out of web services. So for most of us, we can ignore this, but just know that it's sort of like with topology, where once something happens that gets marked, that's been edited and it needs to be validated. That's exactly what this validation rules are like. Something happened, so you need to evaluate to make sure it matches all the rules. All right, covered up the attribute rules. Now what I want to do is sort of finish this with a short discussion and talk about how, and the reason why I focused on attribute rules is because they play a very important role in the future of some of the data modeling that's going on. I can share with you that within the parcel fabric, there is sort of a movement underway to transition away from topology rules to go and check and validate things, because topology rules are really only good for the geometry, right? Into attribute rules, and let the attribute rules be the ways in which we make sure that our data is consistent, make sure that our data meets a certain criteria, and make sure it's valid. We are going to see, as it relates to, at least this would sort of be one of the first solutions in which we see these things, we're going to see an enhanced emphasis on attribute rules. I can tell you coming up in 2.7, there is actually a whole set of rules for the parcel fabric and attribute rules for the parcel fabric. Things like your parcel, no matter what type of parcel it is, your parcel can't be no smaller than this or can't be no larger than this. That in fact, you can't have too much of a variance between the distance field and what's actually, the mapped shape length field on there. Those sorts of rules are being looked at to become introduced in here so that our data can be a higher and higher quality as we're going through here. It is no longer just points and polygons. They're trying to infuse some intelligence into here. All right. Attribute rules are amazing. They really are amazing. And the more we use it, the more we think of new ways that we can go and integrate this to make it more consistent. If you take nothing else out of this, Jeff and some of the other people, arcade, learn arcade, find out about it. It really is an amazing language. It's really good. With that, are there any other questions about this, about attribute rules and what you can do and what you can't do on here? I just gave you a couple examples, some simple things, drilling down not just through one, but multiple layers to pull things out and put them together. And it's amazing what you can do with it. And it is like the old attribute assistant, but on steroids. And it goes with the data. No other questions, no other comments on here. I'm going to stop the recording and we'll transition into office hours. All right. Thank you, Mike. Thanks for attending, and we hope you enjoyed this workshop. If you have questions, would like some more details about anything we discussed during this workshop, or if you or anyone at your organization would like information about training, support, or ways in which we can help you with your GIS needs, please contact me at frank@pandaconsulting.com or call me at 561-691-3277, and we can discuss how we can help you with your needs.